Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast.
All right, welcome to another episode of a Made for Agriculture podcast. I'm your host today, Landry Jones, and with me today is co-host David Moore, our range and pasture specialist. And this is going to be another pasture talk episode. If you all didn't hear our previous episode 98, we're trying to bring you some timely information around the world of livestock and forages, pasture, hay ground, that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to do today, is to bring you some timely topics that we're seeing here in our trade territory of mainly Missouri. Before we get started, let's introduce everyone. Drexel, you're kind of at the top right of my screen, so why don't you go first?
Yeah, Drexel Atkinson with Natural Resource Conservation Service here in Southwest Missouri, soil health specialist.
Rick?
Rick Rath with the Missouri Department of Conservation. I'm a district supervisor down in the very far southwest corner of the state.
Awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate you all joining us today. Thanks for everyone listening. Thanks for taking your all's time to be on this episode. And I'll get into kind of why I've got you all here as guests. But before we kind of get started on that, let's kind of rewind some things and discuss what we're seeing out on the countryside. I know in our last episode, which is probably about a month ago or so, we were talking about the drought we were in and how dry it was. We mentioned some things about some upcoming diseases and things like that producers need to be aware of. But we did get some rain in our territory here last week or so. Unfortunately, there were some areas, I know not too far from where Rick and Drexel live over here in the southwest part of the state, that maybe saw 3/4 of an inch out of all that, and then areas of the state down towards the southern border that saw probably 5-6+ inches. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of how much rain we got around the area. But one thing I kind of wanted to discuss was what some producers can be doing right now that will help increase their odds of having forage longer on their operation. One thing that I see from folks is, especially if you were in part of the state that was extremely dry before we got some of that rain, is that a lot of places had some abused pastures. They were burnt up. They were grazing them to the ground, kind of like we do every year. It just seems like maybe this fall was worse. This summer was worse than some past years. But one thing that comes to mind for me, and David, feel free to chime in here as well, but one thing that comes to mind for me is that we got some rain that greened some things up. We're getting a little cooler temperatures, not a lot. So there is a little bit of cool season grass growth, fescue growth. But if that pasture was overgrazed in the very beginning when we hit this drought, leaving them cattle on that pasture and grazing that 1 or 2 inches of regrowth is going to severely damage that forage crop, not only for this year because we've been abusing it and now we're just going to stay on top of it. We're never going to allow that plant to have a chance to regrow and kind of heal itself from that drought. But it's also going to probably hurt us come next spring too, because those plants aren't going to wake up next spring being healthy and energized. So do you have any recommendations, David? What would you, if you were working with a producer, what's some things that producers can do to kind of help maybe extend some grass a little bit further, or even just looking into next spring, reduce that delayed growth that they may see by abusing the pastures this fall?
Well, I guess my first isn't a do, it's a do not. Try really hard not to open the gates and let them have everything. Typically if we do that, we buy ourselves about 2 weeks of extra grazing while they take that last inch or two all the way down to the ground. And it costs us, as Landry described, it costs us months on the backside. So to save 2 weeks worth of hay, we might have increased our hay need on the back end very significantly. So, if you do have to, if you are getting short, create a sacrifice pasture. Yep. Just as Landry described, it is going to be tough on it. But create one spot, feed hay there until we get to a spot where things are better. That'd be my number one. When we start getting some rain again, we may be able to start rotating once we see grass, beyond 4 inches in a pasture someplace. Another thing we can do that can help extend grass is either supplementing with cubes or tubs, because what grass they do have out there right now is pretty tough. Quality's not that great. I would estimate protein in it's probably in the 8 to 9% range. TDN's probably not going to be much over 50. So they need a little bit of help, both on a protein and energy basis right now. I know from the cattle I'm seeing, they're pretty ready to move. Even if there's some grass left, they're telling you the quality's not there. So let's change that around by providing them some protein, something to help them digest it and make it pass through them a little bit easier. I think it'd be a big step.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's hard for us to do that, especially this time of year. We're used to having some sacrifice paddocks maybe in the early spring when it's muddy and we don't want them out there grazing some of that new fresh growth and delaying some of that. But yeah, no, that's a good point. The other thing that I'd probably mention is think about weaning calves early on those spring calving cows. With the price of calves that they are now. I was reading something or listening to something I don't remember from the university, and they were saying that, you know, by weaning calves early, by pulling them calves off the cows this fall, that essentially you will decrease about 6 to 7 pounds of dry matter for that cow per day. And so that can help extend our pastures out this fall, you know, and wean them now. You know, you don't usually think of it, but, you know, weaning them now when it's maybe a little drier than it would be in October and November. When we start getting hopefully some moisture and we're dealing with the mud. So it might be a little easier weaning process. But consider that. And then the last thing I would, you know, maybe mention is those pastures that have been abused, have been beat up this summer, this fall, is, you know, might have to consider renovating some of those pastures, start thinking about what we might do. We're still in a good opportunity to plant some cereal grains and, you know, interseed it into those pastures to maybe get some increased fall growth and winter utilization. So maybe just kind of start thinking about that because I know with all the rain we had this spring, there was a bunch of weeds out there, and now we've grazed those pastures really short, and so that's only going to, you know, make that issue worse next spring from a weed competition standpoint. So anything else on that before we kind of roll into why we've got our two guests on here?
I got a couple quick things. You know, along the lines of early weaning, another thing we can do to take some of the stress off the cows and nutritional demand off of them is to creep feed. If ever there was a year where it pays, you know, if you can put weight on calves for 80 or 90 cents a pound, and you're extracting back $3.50 for that pound, that is dollars well spent, and you're taking some stress off of the cow. The other thing I want to throw a caution out there, every place I've been lately has a ton of perilla mint. We were wet enough early in the spring that it's everywhere. You know, you cruise along checking heifers early of a morning and you find a dozen cows with their head stuck down through the perilla mint, trying to pick the grass that's growing between it. That's pretty scary. That's the most toxic weed that we have. We could spray it and kill it, but I'd prefer the cattle not be in there. We can bush hog it and kill it. And again, I'd prefer the cattle not be in there. There is a little bit of an increased incidence of cattle consuming it while it's wilting, whether that's from a bush hog or from spray. I'm not going to say it makes them want it. I think it's just that they're not sure what it is, so they decide to try it. And perilla mint's one that they can't try successfully. So kind of keep that in mind. It's probably not one that we're going to totally eliminate, but if we can reduce the amount that's out there, make sure they have something to eat, they won't be as apt to go out there and take a bite of something that's going to end their life. You know, we just got to figure out how to work around it. I won't say with it. We got to work around what's out there because we can't get it all the way it grows.
Good point. Yep. All right. So the reason that we've got our two guests on here, Drexel and Rick, is we wanted to kind of make this episode also a timely episode, but have it revolve around native grasses and native forages. So these two guys I've known for a while. They're two of the best in the state when it comes to managing native grass from a not only from a wildlife standpoint, but more importantly for this episode from a livestock standpoint. And so again, I appreciate y'all joining us today. I guess to kind of kick it off, I'll you know, whoever wants to take this, but when we start talking about native grasses, I guess tell the listeners what are native grasses, what are native forages, and what are native forages. And why would we think about using them? Why would we think, for years, forever, I say for years, for forever, we've known that these native grasses are good for wildlife. They're good for ground nesting birds. But it seems like within the last 5-10 years, there's been a real big push from not only government agencies, but other operations or other organizations to promote these as a forage base for cattle, for livestock. And so I guess, Drexel, I'll turn it over to you or whoever, but kind of tell the listeners what's so important. What are these native grasses, and why would we think about utilizing them as a forage base for our livestock operations?
Yeah, sure, Landry. I think to start with the native grasses, and I would preface that with the discussion being focused mostly on native warm season grasses. There are native cool season grasses and native forbs and whatnot, but primarily focused on the native warm season grasses. The ones that we hear the most about are big blue stem, Indian grass, little blue stem, switchgrass, eastern gamma grass. They're all warm season, so their makeup is a little different. We refer to them sometimes as C4 plants, where cool season grasses are C3 plants. But what difference that makes is in their comfort zone. Their comfort zone is during the summer, and when the nights are warmer and the days are hot, and moisture is less, that's when they thrive. So they have a great growing season from the 1st of June till the 1st of September, which makes them ideal summer forage. And I think whenever we look at what you and David had already talked about some of these fescue pastures, what really makes a difference on some of these operations is not having to graze fescue during the summer months. And the fescue that wasn't grazed during the summer looks tremendously better right now than the fescue that had been, grazed or maybe overgrazed all summer because of the lack of growth and the lack of moisture. So huge benefits there to the fescue part of the farm when the cows don't have to be grazing it during the summer. So,
yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, I think we all have to realize that 99% of our cattle operations in the state are fescue based operations, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think, it's hard not, for me anyways, it's hard not to have the conversation about native warm season grasses that then in turn help manage our fescue pastures. We're never going to get rid of all the fescue in the state, nor to some degree would we want to, because it is a decent forage. It stockpiles, and we'll probably maybe talk about that later or another episode. But I think those two go hand in hand, and a lot of times people kind of forget about that. When we talk about native warm season grasses, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I'm only going to get 3 months utilization out of them in the summer months, right? And not every year. This year was a decent example. We had enough spring rains that I had fescue. I probably didn't even need to utilize my native grass. I did, but most years we're hot and dry in that June, July time frame. And so having those native grasses not only gives you a quality forage, actively grown forage in the summer months, but it also helps our fescue for fall stockpiling, winter stockpiling, things of that nature. But I guess, Rick, did you have anything to add? Did you want to throw in there?
I'll just kind of tag along to what you were saying. We use this native warm season grass in the pasture as it's just a very key part to the grazing system. Call it what you will, drought insurance even. This year it came in pretty handy. Actually, the last several years, it's came in pretty handy to have that drought insurance. And not only is it good insurance, it's some high quality insurance. I mean, it's really good stuff. Myself, I background some of my calves, so fall calving, wean them, put them on the native warm season grass in the summertime, kind of free gains to sell bigger calves. So the benefits, both biologically to the farm itself, the soil, everything is huge, but also the benefits go right on into basically the pocketbook. So economical benefits to it as well.
Yeah.
I think that, you mentioned the 3 months of use, and I think that's, that's a major focus for producers when they look at it. But, what you said, Landry, it's easy to look at the operations that incorporate the native grasses into their summer program, that they're going to get an added 3 months or more on that cool season program on the backside of that. Just, personally, our operation at home, we're going to have 3 months of grazing. Even as dry as it's been, we're going to have 3 months of grazing on fescue before we have to think about, putting out hay. And that could be extended if rains start to come and we get a little bit of fall growing, that extends that out farther. And if we hadn't have had that grass, we would have probably, exhausted our forage base by now or shortly hereafter, and we'd have been feeding hay a lot longer. So it is huge, and so it's not just the growing season of the native grass; it's the extension or the allowance, you might say, of the growing season for that fescue in the fall, because it's ready to grow. If it's not been utilized all summer, we get a little bit of rain, we cool down, and it's ready to grow, rather than having to go through a recuperation process that eats up most of the fall growing season.
Yep. Yep. No, and I think, Rick, you mentioned it there a little bit from a background in calves. I don't typically or like to give the state of Kansas a whole lot of credit, but they've got the Flint Hills, and that was obviously tongue in cheek, but they've been background in calves over there for eons. They see the benefit and the return on investment to have that grass around and utilizing it during the summer months. And I think that's where that's where the money comes in. That's where, in my opinion, you see the biggest return. That's not to say that we can't graze dry cows or spring pears on this stuff and see a huge return on it as well. But when I can put 3 pounds a day on calves just out grazing with maybe a little mineral supplementation, excuse me, that looks pretty good in the pocketbook, especially when calves are bringing what they're bringing now. So anybody else want to mention anything about kind of the what and why on native grasses before we roll into the next one? Okay. So one thing that I hear, and I'm sure you all do as well, one of the negatives that producers kind of throw back to us when we're talking to them about having natives on their operation is not only the process, but the length of time from establishment. I think some of that, if we're establishing the cool season grass in the fall, if we're doing it right, we're probably not really heavily utilizing that cool season grass until the following fall. We might get a little spring utilization, but it's still growing. It's still healing itself. So the time of establishment to utilization for cool season grass is about the same for native grass. I mean, we tell folks about a year from planting till we can really start to utilize it. So that, I don't think, is a huge deal. Now, there's some things that come into play that may be extended out to a couple years, depending on the density of the stand and some other, weather conditions, things outside of our control. But for the most part, it's not a whole lot different than establishing cool season grasses from that standpoint. But why don't, Rick, if you would kind of walk us through just some, and again, we'll probably get into the nuts and bolts of establishing natives maybe closer to springtime. We may probably have another episode on that, but just give us an overview of, some methods and things that producers need to be thinking about. Again, this is a timely conversation hopefully we're having, that producers either are interested in it or maybe don't know what it is, but sound like they want to do it. And so let's kind of, where do we start the process? When do we start it? And then how do we kind of go about establishing these native grasses?
Yeah. So I'll just start by saying we've come a long way in the last couple of years with establishment techniques. The herbicides that are available now, the kind of tried and true practices that we're doing have really sped the establishment time up, which is great. You never want to take a pasture out of production any longer than you have to. So that was something that the three of us really concentrated on over the last 10 years, trying to figure out the way we can get this stuff established in a timely manner. So the main thing is when you plant native warm season grass, it starts slow. You got to be very patient with it. So the seedlings are pretty small, they're pretty weak, and they don't take competition well. And once those seedlings are in the ground, your hands are kind of tied on herbicides. So doing the work, doing a lot the site prep work before the seeds in the ground is important. And like I said, this time of year, what could you be doing? If you're going to plant next spring, take care of some problem weeds right now. If there's sericea out there, if there's even clover can be a real big problem in establishment year. So if you identify the problems that you have, the earlier you can get control of them, the better. Because like I said, once the seed's in the ground, your hands are going to be tied on the herbicides that you can use until that grass is established. And usually, a lot of times we're getting it, the grass tall enough, big enough that it can withstand a broadleaf herbicide that first year, but it's going to be well into, probably late August, September, if everything goes right. So like I said, the seedlings are very small. Any kind of competition during those first couple months in the spring and early summer, basically the competition is stealing sunlight and is stealing moisture from those seedlings. Two very important things. So, like I said, the herbicides, if you use the big blue stem Indian grass or little blue stem, you can use a Mazapic, which is a really good pre-emerge or post-emerge on those 3 species to control a lot of the grassy species. It won't control legumes. So that's something that you need to identify, well before. But basically, with any planting, whether you're planting fescue or warm season grass or corn, you want to start with a clean, firm seed bed. And the best way to do that is to not rush into it, but also, identify what's there and take care of what you can prior to putting the seed in the ground. And then the post-planting management, that's a whole nother topic. But it's definitely more work on the front end before you get the seed in the ground is definitely worth the time and maybe the cost that's going to come with it.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I mean, I think a lot of people that's why we're having this conversation now is we don't want people, it takes some planning, depending on the method that you use, and we can discuss that as well. But we don't want people rolling around March 1st and saying, yep, this is something I want to do, and then going out and expecting to have a successful stand. Most of the stands that I see that are successful, they've got a plan in place, now or even before now, of how they're going to go about establishing this grass, whether it's a broadcast method or a drilling method or a cover crop method or whatever it is. They've got some plans in place. So if you're interested in these grasses, be thinking about, not only how you're going to establish them, the location, the field that you're going to do it. We kind of say here in the southern part of the state, the goal would be to have about 30 to 40%, but depending on your operation and how you're going to utilize the grass, but anywhere from, 30 to 40% of your forage base in a warm season forage of some sort. Farther north, you may not need as much as that, maybe 20, 25% or something like that. But and don't go about doing that all at one year. Usually we recommend doing it in stages because we do run into droughts in Missouri and we do have failed stands. So we wouldn't want to try to renovate a large amount of acres and then not have that forage there to be able to utilize if it is a failed stand. So, Drexel, did you have anything else that you wanted to add, like from an establishment standpoint? Just, I know you guys kind of done, and we'll get into this here in a little bit. I know you and Rick kind of have established your grasses a little bit different, a couple different methods, and we'll go into that. But did, anything from what producers maybe need to be thinking about now, prepping their ground or getting ready to do some seedings this winter or spring?
Yeah, I think there's and again, as we get into it a little further into the talk here, we can get a little deeper into it. But I think Rick's and your comments about having a plan, I think are really something that producers need to be thinking about this months in advance. So I think the last couple of years we've seen some really good things come from a fall applied broadleaf herbicide with a long residual in the fall before planting, because as Rick mentioned, oftentimes we can't get that broadleaf herbicide on those seedlings until they reach a certain point of growth, till they're certain maturity level to be able to tolerate that. But the plant back time on those broadleaf herbicides, if we put one on this fall, we can plant in the spring, and that residual will help control some of those broadleaf weeds early in the planting season. So we've seen really good success with that. So if you're thinking about planting in the spring, then that would be something I would really be considering doing right now, is getting a product, that's a long residual of herbicide, broadleaf herbicide out there this fall. And then just being able to control the grazing on it, as we go deeper, just having a plan to make sure we can have animals out there if it's still in fescue and we're going to go from fescue to native grass, having it grazed down is really a good. It needs to happen. So having a plan to have enough animals there on that particular paddock to get that fescue grazed down pretty short is, I think, essential for a good planting into that dead sod that we would kill in the spring. So, and like you mentioned, Rick and I have established it, different methods, different ways, both very successful. And so it really just goes to what an individual producer would want to do or think they can do. And I would say also, just for all those that are listening, there's nothing better than having a one-on-one conversation with a planter, to help you make those kind of decisions. And whether it be one of us or one of our planter on our staff at one of the offices, definitely work with someone and individualize that plan just a little bit for you.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. Before we get into kind of what you alluded to from how you all are establishing these grasses, I want to circle back around and kind of maybe throw this back to David. We start talking about a herbicide with residual in it, and we talk about this on cool season grass pastures, David. But what is the benefit, and kind of tell us why would we, when we talk about herbicides and spraying weeds, we're mainly concerned during the growing season, right? We're in May, June, July timeframe. Not to say that there's not some weeds out there that we maybe can't control now, but what is the benefit to a producer that's going to apply a herbicide, and would you recommend one herbicide over the other if they're going to go out and do some spraying here now or here in the next 30, 45 days?
I guess my thought process would go to trying to eliminate winter annuals, trying to eliminate biennials, and maybe have enough residual left over after the winter to start catching some of the real early summer annuals. So, winter annuals, henbit, chickweed, trying to stop mare's tail, dock, thistles, teasel, spotted knapweed. There's a whole host of things that could cause us trouble. And if we can stop them before we start, I think it's a great idea. Probably, I think about residual wise, I think 3 herbicides come to mind pretty quick. Chaparral, Grazing Next, and Duracor, all 3 do a great job. Probably my thought processes would roll to Chaparral before the others. The metsulfuron, in addition to being the Chaparral's metsulfuron and aminopyrrolid, they both do a great job on broadleaf weeds, but the metsulfuron's particularly hard on fescue. Fescue is one of the biggest competitors that we have for native warm season grasses. So the more uncomfortable I can make fescue, the better off we're going to be as we try to establish native warm season grass. So I would lean that direction. When we're spraying chaparral on fescue and we're wanting to not harm it, we're running in that 2 to 2.5 ounces per acre range. If I'm putting that down in the fall of the year and wanting to get as much residual as I can out of it and still be safe to plant native grass, 3.3 ounces is a max rate, and that's really uncomfortable for fescue. That's going to do a bang up job, especially if you go ahead and do your burn down on fescue now. Ammonium sulfate, Roundup, and chaparral mix is going to go a long ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't written Drexel, and Rick and I had this conversation about using residual herbicides in the fall, and for whatever reason, chaparral didn't even really come into the mix. Just because I'm so used to, Duracore or Grazon, but using that chaparral to ding that fescue the fall before you're going to convert that to native warm season grass is a really good option. And I think one thing just to kind of hit on real quick too is, when we're talking to producers, if you spray a residual now, that you potentially have residual left in that soil to reduce weeds on up into late winter, early spring is kind of hard for people to wrap their heads around, because they're going to say, well, I sprayed it in May and by July 15th, I had other weeds emerging. Well, moisture is one of those things that helps wash that herbicide out of the soil profile, as well as the microbial activity. And when we get below, 50, 60 degree soil temperatures, that microbial activity drops quite a bit, and they don't consume that herbicide or process that herbicide. And so it has the ability to hang around a lot longer in the soil profile to help with germinating of weed germination. So, okay. So
we really don't get as much moisture in the winter as we think we do.
Right.
You get a little bit of snow, a little bit of ice here and there. It doesn't add up to the same as the 20 inches of rain we had in May.
Right.
So that, normally I would tell people you get 30 to 90 days of residual depending upon moisture on a spring applied herbicide. On a fall applied herbicide, you start thinking about spraying somewhere around or after Halloween. We're looking at being able to get 5 months out of that, as a general rule. And that's pretty outstanding. Most of us don't really realize how much improvement we can get with a real late fall applied herbicide. So.
Yep. Good points. So we've alluded to this already, but I kind of wanted to bounce this off of you, Rick and Drexel. I know you guys have established these grasses a little bit different methods. Why don't we go into that? Just kind of tell folks how you in the past established these native grasses, and maybe some of the benefits and negatives, if there are some, on the method that you choose. So Drexel, I'll turn it back over to you, I guess.
Yeah. So I've just I've established several acres in native warm season grass, and the method that works for me is basically a direct conversion from fescue to the native warm season grasses, starting in the fall with a broadleaf, which I haven't always done, but I have done the last couple of times. And David mentioned mare's tail, and I didn't spray one particular conversion and had a lot of mare's tail, but no mare's tail where I put the fall broadleaf on and not with any preference, but I used Duracore and did not have the spring weeds. So generally, I usually would consider that, put this time of year, put on that broadleaf herbicide, and I would graze pretty much all winter. If I get some growth, then I'll graze it, and then come spring, that's whenever I really intensify that. And about the month of April, I will put enough animals on there that they will really do some damage. I mean, they're keeping it grazed down pretty tight, and I may supplement with hay so that I can just keep that grass grazed down tight. And then around the 1st of May, I'll remove the animal, let it have maybe just a week because it's wanting to grow quickly. And then I hit it with the glyphosate and a Mazapic combination. I've been using 1.5 quarts of glyphosate with the ammonia sulfate to precondition the water before I put it in, and then 6 ounces of the Mazapic. Spray and drill same day apart, just whatever I can make happen. I always spray first and then drill. And again, it could be the same day, and patience. And then it will die. You'll wonder if it's going to die, but it dies. And about the time it turns yellow and brown, you start to see a little bit of green most of the time, and then the native grasses are coming. And so that's been a real successful program for me to go directly from fescue. And then if I need to clean up fescue, I can be real hard on fescue with the Mazapic. I can be real hard on fescue with chaparral, which I have done, and I can wait till fall. If I have a strip or something I missed, I can wait till fall when my native grasses go dormant, and I can go back out with glyphosate and take care of that fescue after my native grasses have gone dormant. But that has been very successful on our operation. I will preface that with timing is important, very, very important. I have my own sprayer, and so that is huge because I'm not waiting on having to get somebody. And I think oftentimes some of our producers, there's a limited number of people that custom apply, and sometimes you get on a list and they can't get there when you want them there. And so by having my own sprayer, it's up to me. I get there when I want to get there, and I'm able to spray timely and drill timely, because it seems like with this establishment method, days are critical. If we get a little farther down the calendar in May, we're that closer to hot, dry weather, and those seedlings do need some moisture to get going. So, I like to have it planted by May the 15th, and been very successful with doing that.
Yep. Thank you. Rick, how do you go about establishing natives, or what's kind of your recipe?
Yeah, so a little is the Drexel. He can get it done. But he's right there, right? He's sprayer soaked up, drills in the barn, things like that. My method is a little different, and I don't know if it's because maybe I'm a wildlifer at heart, or it may be because I have too many irons in the fire, and on the weekends I'm usually at a ball field or a volleyball game or something, chasing kids around and doing all kinds of different stuff. But so my method, I've done a lot on my place, and I've also helped a lot of other landowners that I've worked with in the past, is using annual forage crops as a site prep tool to get that clean seed bed. Sometimes it takes 6 months, sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it may take a year and a half until we actually get that seed in the ground. But the whole time we're going to be providing some pretty high quality forage during that site prep. So generally what I would do is go into a field, say, around September. And we're just going to say it's a fescue field because that's what we usually convert. Go into a field in September, graze it pretty heavy, get it right down to the ground, and then come right over the top of it with about 2 quarts of glyphosate. We'll go right behind that glyphosate, drill in a fall mix. Like I said, I got a wildlife interest, so I'm planting oats, rye, maybe triticale, some peas, wheat, turnips, all kinds of. It's the stuff that you can get with a deer on the bag, but I'm planting it for the cows, right? It's a food plot for the cows. So sometimes in the fall, if we have some rain in the fall, that stuff will come up and we can get a grazing on it in the fall. But most of the times, it's, especially the last couple of years, it's been really tough. It'll get started, but it's really the springtime is when it really pays dividends. So that's when, you're stocking it pretty heavy to kind of stay ahead of this stuff before it seeds out. So back to the site prep, we've already got one burn down using glyphosate on that field. Springtime, we're going to graze it till about May 15th, something like that. Take it right down to the ground. Again, come back over the top of it with another burn down of glyphosate, and we're right behind it with a summer annual. I like mixes. You can go, you can be as plain, basic, or as complicated as you want to do. I like Sudan, millet, sunflowers, cowpeas, and something that I do because where my ground's at, it's been abused. It's pretty rough. So I hung out with Drexel long enough to catch the soil health bug, and using these annual forages and grazing these annual forages, it seems like it just revitalizes the soil. And the native grass is really tied to soil biology. So it's a win-win. We're getting the site prep done. We're kind of revitalizing that soil biology. And then we're creating some really high quality forage for the cows. So my cows really never leave the field. I mean, we're rotating through, but they never really are out of this field for very long. So we're in the summertime. We're planting that Sudan millet sunflower mix. We're going to keep it grazed, throughout the summer, and then maybe in September we'll graze it down to the ground again. At that point, you could go back in with a fall mix, or you could just all right, we're done with our forages now. Now we're just going to concentrate on continually killing any more weeds that are coming up. An application of Roundup in the fall, and then that can either sit idle, or you could plant something else in there. Just realize if you plant something in there in the fall, we're going to have to get it off by May 15th the following year, because that's when we're going to go in and drill our native warm season grass. So at that time, May 15th, whether you have a crop in there or not, we're going to terminate again. At that time, we're going to use probably 1.5 quarts of glyphosate plus 6 ounces of Mazapic if we're going to do a big blue stem Indian grass, little blue stem mix. And that's generally what I do. It's the easiest path because we can use that Mazapic. It's a great forage producing mix, great for wildlife, great for everything that the native grass are going to bring. And we can add diversity to that later on. But we add that 6 ounces of Mazapic at the time of planting with the glyphosate. That way we have our seeds in the ground. Like I said earlier, our hands are going to be a little bit tied for herbicide, but we can use that 6 ounces of Mazapic. That's going to give us, depending on rainfall, it's going to give us, 30 to 60 days control, pre-emerge control of some weedy grasses for the most part. What that also does, the maximum rate of Mazapic is 12 ounces per year. So we're doing a split application. I still got 6 ounces of Mazapic in my back pocket if needed for anything that comes up that I didn't know was there. Maybe Johnson grass is there. Maybe crabgrass. Crabgrass always comes in. If we need that other 6 ounces, we can hit that midsummer, and that will give us control up into the fall until the native warm season grass had done its thing for that year. Again, we set ourselves up. We created some soil biology. We've done multiple burn downs. We're still keeping cows in the field. But once the seed goes in the ground, obviously there's no method that you can plant native grass and graze the same year. Basically, you have to be out of that field the first summer. There's no way around it, really. That's the best we can do. But doing the annual forages, and like I said, you can do it for just one planting before, or you can go multiple years if you really want to build that soil biology up and you're really tied to those annual forages. I mean, you could do it for a while. And I even do it on just renovating old fescue fields. It is such a big benefit. And just a side note, because I got the wildlife, there's always a brood of turkeys and a brood of quail in the annual forage mixes. And then that first year of a native grass planting, when it's still a little thin, a little weedy, there's always a brood of turkeys, always a brood of quail. So that's where my wildlife interest kind of peaks right there. I just don't know what better we could be doing for our cattle, our ground. We're retaining, once we get the native grass in, we're retaining some water. It's not running off and running to the neighbors. The wildlife, I always tell folks, if you see more wildlife on your farm, that means you're doing a better job of managing the total resource on the farm. They're a good indicator. So that's my method. And I promote it a lot because it does your windows of opportunity if you don't have your own sprayer. I have my own sprayer, but it's broke most of the time. So even though I'm ready to spray, I usually got to run to the parts store and then it starts raining or something like that. So and for the weekend guys, the guys that are just there on the weekends, it's too dark by the time you get home from work. So you got weekends, your timing is just, it opens it up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it's really worked well with the private landowners I worked with and myself.
Good.
And I think that you alluded to some things there too, Rick, that are worth expanding on. Both of us are planting primarily a Mazapic tolerant native warm season grasses, the big blue, the Indian, and little blue. If you, if a producer wanted to expand on that with more diversity and include switchgrass, eastern gamma grass. Those grasses are not imazapic tolerant, and Rick's method would lend itself to ensuring that we've got the fescue out, and we may never get it all out, but we can do a better job because we have multiple times there. And that method probably lends itself a little bit more to more diverse mixes being planted than the way I've gone about it. It's really is dependent on the imazapic for that establishment. So I have not included switchgrass and or eastern gamma grass in my method. So again, that goes back to really an individual plan where we can work with producers that have a particular desire. If they have a desire for these other grasses, then we can work with them to develop a plan that would give them the best chance of success for their planting.
Yeah. Well, good points. And I think, again, we could take this podcast for 3 hours, and again, we'll probably have another episode where we'll kind of dive into some of these topics a little deeper. We give Rick a hard time because he works for a wildlife agency, but you don't know how many times I've worked with producers that have established these grasses and they're not doing it for quail in mind, right? They're doing it for cattle production, forage production. And you go and check on them a couple years later and they hear a covey of quail on their property that they haven't heard in 20 years. And so it's pretty cool to see that reaction from producers when they weren't really doing it for that reason, but they kind of now get the whole picture and see the benefits of it, not only from cattle production, but also just conservation standpoint. So,
and I think that's worth noting that even these forage stands that we're establishing are so much better for wildlife than our monoculture or nearly monoculture stands of fescue. I came at it from that very direction, Landry. I
didn't want to say your name, but go ahead.
Well, it's okay.
I mean,
15 years ago, I was one of those that, hey, this has got to work for forage. This has got to work for my cattle operation because I'm not loading up quail in the fall or the spring and selling them. I am in the beef business, so this has got to work for the beef business, and the wildlife is huge because even though I have good solid forage stands, I have quail, and I've got several coveys of quail that we did not have prior to planting these native grasses. And the other thing too is just like Rick said, that we worked hard to get this down to a basically that one summer that 12 months if you want to look at it that way, from the time that we plant till the following spring. We worked really hard to develop these methods so that producers would only be out of forage on those acres for that 12-month period from planting, the spring planting till the following spring. And I think we've done a pretty good job of getting that down to a 1-year establishment. I will not say that it's a guarantee because the weather is not a guarantee. When we have good weather and we have good moisture in the seedling year, when we plant, we are grazing the next year. And so that is huge because a lot of producers have thought that this is a 3-year process, 4-year process, and it could be, but it doesn't have to be. And so I think that's huge for the cattle producers to realize that we can get forage in a year with the work that we've done and the use of herbicides and the invent of these herbicides.
Yeah. No, good points. And I just kind of realized this, but David, I believe you're getting ready to establish some native grasses on your place here coming up this spring. It maybe is a good opportunity. We've been through this and been around it, and I don't know if I may try to establish something more here in a couple years or so, but I guess from a producer standpoint that's looking at maybe establishing some this spring, is there anything that you want to mention or concerns or questions? Or, I mean, be a good opportunity for somebody that's maybe listening to this and thinking about it. Kind of what's going through your mind, I guess, from a standpoint, or going into this next spring, if this may be some establishment.
Well, where we're at right now, we've done a first burn down, and I'm probably going to have to do some some fire to get rid of some trash that's on that particular field before we come back with a final application of glyphosate. We're going to plant wheat with the intent of terminating it in late April. And then our next field to follow, we're going to put in a summer annual next year. I wanted to touch on one thing Rick brought up, and that's that crabgrass always comes. When you're choosing a summer annual, don't choose crabgrass. It reseeds itself extremely, extremely well. And you'll rue that day that you put crabgrass seed out there for that summer annual. Choose something else. But man, what a great grass it is. We've touched on how much production it can make even when we are a little bit dry in the summertime, and how happy it is. Those 6-foot tap roots, they make a huge difference, compared to 6-inch roots, 12-inch roots on 12-inch roots on really healthy fescue. There's just a huge difference between them. We're really looking forward to having that ability to add a couple of pounds of average daily gain during the times that we're grazing native warm season grasses.
Okay.
It's a process.
It is.
Create a plan and then work the plan.
Yep.
That's all I can tell. I try to keep going over that with people. It is a 3-year process to get to that 30 or 40%. We did used to have 3 to 4 years to get them established, but as you guys have touched on, and I'm really glad you've repeated those statements, the new protocols, the new seeding rates, the new herbicide, all of that makes a difference, a huge difference. I can remember the first time I planted a native warm season grass. It was 3 years until I got it. That's just not the case anymore. If Mother Nature will cooperate at all, 12 months to grazing, and that's a game changer for most people.
Yep. Well,
Hey, Landry, we've touched on planning. We've actually touched on planning a lot, and you guys heard me say this in a number of workshops that we've done. A native warm season planting, it has to be a priority on your farm for that year. So I've worked with a lot of landowners. The ones that make it a priority, they're the poster child for this. They have beautiful stands of grass the first year. They're in there the second year, grazing it, reaping all the benefits. The ones that don't make it a priority, that, put it second or third or fourth on the list, that's the ones that struggle. And that's the ones that they have a half-hearted attempt at this is going to give you a half-hearted stand. So, like I said, make it a priority. That means you're working calves in the rain because you had to spray when it wasn't raining. That's the way it's going to be. That it has to be a priority. Otherwise, it's just going to be you're going to have to fight a little bit harder for it.
Yeah.
So that's just my 2 cents. You've heard it before, but I think it's important to let folks know.
Absolutely, man.
I would agree. I think that's really important, that create a plan, work the plan, and like you said, make it number one priority, that this is going to be successful only if I make it number one.
Yeah. No, and I think, and we kind of fall into the trap of, I'm going to make a priority, and then as soon as that drill leaves the field, or we spray that second dose of Mazapic later on in the spring, we kind of walk away from it. And that stand really needs to be observed, and you kind of need to keep track of it all year, because I know we've probably all been in the same boat where you get a call and want to go out and look at a native grass field, in July and August, and it's overran with weeds, and it's like, well, did you check on the field? Did we do any other spraying? And it's like, no, I kind of did what they told me to do. I sprayed a second dose in June and walked away from it. And so it's one of those things, not only making a plan, sticking with that plan and carrying it out through that first growing season, and even into the second growing season. I mean, there's instances where we still kind of got to manage that field pretty intensely going into that second year too. So no, that's an awesome point, Rick. I'm glad you brought that up. So
Absolutely.
And for anybody listening, like, there's so much help out there. Every
Mhm.
conservation, natural resource agency, NGO, MFA. I mean, there's so many people out there that can help, that have experience in this, because this establishing native warm season grass isn't normal for most folks. They haven't done it before, but we have people. So you can about throw a rock and hit some and a professional that can help you out with the planning. Find those, identify problems early, which is key. Identify those problems, take care of those problems early. So Drexel mentioned that any NRCS MDC folks we're here to help and hopefully give you the best shot of a successful planting.
And I just want to throw one more thing in there too, is when you're thinking about these grasses, and it's some of that thought process needs to be where we're going to locate these grasses too on the operation. So I hear two things that I would point out just in case you're hearing this for the first time out there. We want to locate these grasses where they will work in your operation. We don't want to put them where it's going to be hard to graze because they're in a place where you can't get the cows to. You need to be able to manage the grazing on these grasses and utilize them. And so the proper location on the farm, and then with that also the soils, because a lot of times, producers will gravitate toward a piece of ground that they have a tough time growing anything on. Well, we need to really figure out why that is. And if that piece of ground isn't supporting vegetation, that's not the place to go to put these native grasses. The place to go to put these native grasses is where they can do their best work. And that may be on some of the better soils on the operation, not the poorest soil. So it's easy for a producer to decide, I'm going to put it here because I have a terrible stand of forage already. Well, we need to know why we have a terrible stand of forage. If it's on a rock outcrop and there's only 6 inches of soil there, that's not where we want to put these native grasses. We want to put them where they can do their best work. So that's just a couple things there to keep in mind when we're in the planning process of where we would plant native grasses.
Okay. Well, I think that kind of wraps most of the things up that we had to discuss today. We talked about most everything I think that I had written down for the most part. Did you guys have anything, or coming up on an hour, I think, to have anything else that you wanted to add to the conversation or discuss?
The only thing I would add on selection to what Drexel was talking about, as much as is possible, if you can keep those acres contiguous, keep them touching, so you don't have to wander cattle all over the farm moving from field to field that's warm season grass, and give thought to water and shade. Your summer grazing, you're going to have shade in every paddock. You're going to have water in every paddock. And, be thinking about that as you plan rather than after the grass gets there.
Yeah, good point.
I would just say in closing, the benefits to warm season grasses are broad, and they're bountiful. And so if you have not considered them, I would encourage every producer that listens to this to at least consider them, check into them, talk to somebody about them, because it's a huge benefit to a cattle operation.
Yeah.
Amen.
Agreed.
Better soil, better average daily gains, better paycheck at the end of the year, better wildlife. I don't see a downside.
Yep.
That's right.
No, that sounds good, guys. That's a good way to wrap it up. I appreciate your all's time. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for everyone listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Made for Agriculture, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.